Good afternoon. Good evening. Good evening. Thank you all for being here. Thank you. Thank you for my support. My name is Ebonie Jackson. I manage the Women's Center here at York College, and I'm excited to kick off our 2019 Women's History Month colloquium. Every year we do this to celebrate Women's History Month, and so we're excited to have it again this March and to have such an esteemed guest and speaker here at York College. Before we get to that, we are going to have another esteemed guest who is going to get us started. He's actually one of our students, one of you from York College. We have the pleasure of having one of our students, Cameron Bruno, who is a sophomore student here at York College. She has been named the 2018-2019 NYC Youth Poet Laureate. So we're very, very excited about that. Cameron is, as I said, a sophomore student here at York College, and we recognized Cameron before she received this honor. I just want to put that out there. She is a talented poet who's been recognized in her home area in Trinidad and Tobago and all across the Caribbean, and now here in New York City. So to kick us off, I'm going to introduce Cameron Bruno. I don't usually like to talk before performances. Like, thank you. Okay. It's a routine. Every day, and they don't even realize insanity, no new results, the same act being act itself. Look, it's happening again. Nothing can be seen until it's switched up, then switch up, light up, curtains rise, audience silence, audience sighs, no applause. I am nothing more than a device, never used at my fullest potential. I wish I could move. I never asked to be bought or broadcast. Funny how a living room could turn into a stadium in seconds. How much fires could be started from a boxing match in living rooms when he becomes Mayweather. How limbs a punching bag. I feel like if I could do something, if only I could move. Because love isn't supposed to be this dirty, this violent. They say lightning doesn't strike the same place twice yet. Her body is a power pole. She's still in shock that he struck her again. I watch in despair. Jaws shut like my mouth. I watch her say, she teaches that she still finds a way to love him. When last you see a woman get slapped silly, shut silent, say to those same teachers that she still finds a way to love him. Some women work way harder than I do. After I do, some women work way harder than a fridge. Always open, always running, ready for anything. Inside cold as a sea prepared for her depths in creation. This fridge leaks water. This fridge wept again. I wasn't teach her just like you teach me. An appliance, we use, misuse, abuse, and then replace with warranty, 30-day money back guarantee. And I get jealous, because it's obvious when someone keeps you off your feet, you have to learn somewhere. Because appliances are never taught anything other than cleaning up the reckless acts of humans. Because there's nothing much you can do when you can't move outside of being shaken, body slam into me. But I'm not a body. I don't heal like they do. Yes, I have to stand here and watch them break themselves into pieces. Watch them break themselves as if the human body was made of ceramics that I was. I listen. I take impact like walls. I hate how impact sounds. I am not just an appliance tucked in a corner of a room that breaks. I'm a rigid trained witness. I am the embodiment of silence. But I'd rather be a broom iron than spoon than a human, immobile and senseless, but we turn a blind eye, but we can't look away from domestic and sexual violence, as if it's none of our business. Society says, turn the left cheek, turn the right cheek, uppercut. Pretend not to see, but to me this is routine. So lights down, curtains closed. Audience applause. How? Thank you. Thank you so much, Cameron. That was very powerful and I think a very appropriate beginning to our program today. So to get underway, we are going to get started. There will be some welcome and opening remarks. For that, I'm going to introduce our York College President, President Marcia Hughes.
And thank you again, Cameron. And thanks to you, Ms. Jackson, and your team who put this particular program on every year for Women's History Month. But this year, certainly, we are looking forward to our keynote speaker, featured speaker, Ms. Tarana Burke. But I did want to just bring greetings on behalf of our 8,000 students, our almost 200 full-time faculty, our many, many staff. I want to say that it is a delight for us to be here to be able to put this kind of programming on, and I'm glad that you're here to listen, to ask your questions, and to learn. The evening, I'm sure, is going to be very, very interesting. It is always interesting, of course, to have someone like Ms. Burke in our midst. And I must also say a heartfelt note of thank you to our own distinguished lecturer, who is no longer with us, but who you will see in a minute, our own Dr. Ron Daniels, who was at York College for many, many years, some 12 or so, if I remember right, Dr. Daniels. And he did promise to not only stay in touch with us, but stay in touch with a very engaged and active way. And so we're delighted, Dr. Daniels, that you have been the instrument today for us to have Ms. Burke with us. And so with that, I want to welcome you all. I want to give a very deeply felt, heartfelt thank you to Ms. Burke for responding to Dr. Daniels' call to join us. And I know we're going to have a very engaging evening. And I invite all of those who may be sitting in the back just to come on down, because you want to be able to see this up close. You want to be able to get to the microphones when it's your turn and ask your questions. And I know you have your books in hand, and I know it's going to be a very, very powerful read. So thank you in the audience for coming out. Let's have a great, great evening.
Thank you so much, President Hughes. So let me just explain a little bit how the evening is going to go, and then we're going to really jump right into it. First, as President Hughes mentioned, hopefully the students here have received a copy of the colloquium book. This month's colloquium book is called Hey Shorty, A Guide to Combating Sexual Harassment and Violence in Schools and on the Street. It's a great book. Hopefully you guys have a copy of it, and obviously very appropriate and relevant to the conversation tonight. In just a few minutes, as President Keys mentioned, Dr. Ron Daniels is going to come in to introduce our speaker. Ms. Burke and I are going to have a discussion up here, and then there will be some time at the end for Q&A. There are 2 microphones, one on each side, for you guys to ask a couple of questions at the end, and then we'll have our reception out back. So that's going to be the evening. I thank you all for being here. I want to get started because I know that you don't want to hear from me. You want to hear from Ms. Burke, so we're going to get her on as soon as possible. With that said, I'm going to introduce our esteemed and distinguished lecturer, Dr. Ron Daniels.
Thank you so much. Well, it's great to be back home. York College is home. Right. See the provost coming, as he always does, to support these programs. First of all, I quickly want to acknowledge my president. There's only one president to be, and that's President Dr. Marcia Keys. Let's give it up again for President Keys. Also, Vice President, Vincent Van Ray is in the house. He is Vice President for Student Development, and these programs would not happen without him, and we collaborated on some great programs. So let's give it up to the Vice President as well. And let's give up a big round of applause for our manager of the Women's Center, Ebonie Jackson. Let's give up a big round of applause to her. This was her idea, all right? So quickly, let me just introduce a friend and a mentee and a mentor. And when I say mentor, a mentor of me, because she has taught me so much, and I'm still learning from this phenomenal woman. Tarana Burke is a civil rights activist who was the original founder of #MeToo. That's who we have in our presence today. You have seen it. You see her all over. You see this incredible movement that was spawned in the mind and the heart of this incredible woman, which she started in 2006. It later became the global phenomenon that raised awareness about sexual harassment, abuse, and assault in society in 2017. For me, when I first met Tarana, it was in Selma, Alabama, where I used to go, and I will go back, but almost every year for about 20 years. And of course, I had the privilege of having our president go in 2013, and in 2015, for the 50th anniversary, we took about 40 students to Selma, Alabama for the Bridge Crossing Jubilee commemorating the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. Tarana started her professional career in Selma, Alabama, where she worked with the 21st Century Youth Leadership Movement, which is really one of the great movements in the country today. She also works at the National Voting Rights Museum and Institute and the Black Belt Arts Cultural Center. Later on, as she moved out of Selma to do other kinds of things, she created her own organization, Just Be Incorporated, and now she is currently the Senior Director at Girls for Gender and Equity in Brooklyn. She's in the People's Republic of Brooklyn. Came out of the Bronx, by the way. Let's give it up for that. And she engages in public speaking events across the country, promoting and supporting sexual assault survivors, and also educating us. And she has just been a really tremendous person. And one of the things that I have to say, as we talked about on our radio show the other day, this is not easy work. She's taken a lot of abuse because she's been willing to hold us accountable, to hold the Black community accountable. And so when you see what is happening now with R. Kelly, she's one of the early ones who called that out and said that we needed to deal with that, and other kinds of issues that we have sort of been reluctant to do because we don't want to attack heroes or bring back down famous Black men. She's been willing to tackle it, knowing that we will never be healed and whole as a community until we deal with these issues. So it's my honor to present to you a phenomenal woman, Tarana Burke.
Hi, my name is Tarana Burke, and I'm the founder of the Me Too movement. We founded Me Too. Can you guys hear it? Can you please microphone? Okay. All right. Hi. How's everybody? Well, welcome.
Thank you
Thank
very
you for
much.
probably the first time. Welcome to York College.
Thank you. I'm very happy.
We're so excited for you to be here. Everybody has your bio in the program, but we're going to talk a little bit more about who you are and about the Me Too movement. And just to give people some background information, I did have a video clip, which we are now going to play about your words, what Me Too are, and we'll talk a little bit more after the clip.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Tarana Burke, and I'm the founder of the Me Too movement. We founded Me Too over a decade ago to support young women of color in the community we live who were survivors of sexual violence. In the years since we started, we've expanded to support adults and people across the gender spectrum who have been holding the trauma of sexual violence for many, many years. Now, since the expansion or explosion of Me Too in 2017, we have a unique opportunity to expand our platform and continue a national conversation around sexual violence in this country and countries around the world. But we want to be clear about what the Me Too movement is about. There's lots of conversation about it being about taking down powerful men or about targeting people, and it's not about any of those things. This is a movement about giving people access to a healing journey, to make sure the most marginalized amongst us have an opportunity to start a pathway to healing from the trauma of sexual violence. It's also a movement about radical community healing. We believe that communities have to come together to make them safe and to protect the most vulnerable people from sexual violence. We do this through two ideas. One is called empowerment and empathy. We believe in the power of empathy to support people. When two people exchange the word Me Too, it is literally an exchange of empathy between people that says, I hear you, I see you, and I believe you. Once people have that, it gives them permission to start a healing journey. And that's what we're about. The other idea is radical community healing. And that means that in all the ways that sexual violence is allowed to flourish in our communities, we want to work against that. Ultimately, this is a movement about eradicating sexual violence. We want to teach people how to lean into their joy so that they can move away from the trauma. And we want to teach people that we can, as a collective, interrupt sexual violence wherever it lives. And we want to do that together. We need everybody doing all the work they can in all the ways they can to interrupt sexual violence. And we invite you to join us.
Yeah, turn that down a little bit.
A little bit. Yeah, a little bit. So, I thought that was a nice introduction. It was brief. It was 2 minutes. Do you have anything to add? Because I know that this movement is big and it's growing and developing kind of as we speak. Do you have anything to add about what Me Too really is?
Yeah, I think that the only thing I would add to that, which is the thing that we realized over this last year, is that the other part of our work is about shifting the narrative. There are several different narratives about what Me Too is, but also about what sexual violence is and how it affects people's lives and how people are supposed to survive it or not. And I think another part of our job that we didn't see necessarily as our job 2 years ago is that we have to figure out how to insert ourselves into pop culture and then to reshape this narrative that people have. I realized with these big cases that have come out recently, and even around the Kavanaugh hearing, when people were talking about Dr. Blake's court, I realized that the problem here is they don't know what this looks like. We've been watching television, right, and movies that give us a very finite view of what survivors are supposed to be like and what they're supposed to look like. And so it's up to us to change that, because once people understand what it is to survive, what that actually looks like, then they can understand why we need the kind of resources we need, why we need to do the kind of work we need to do. And these are people who will be jurors and who will be voting. And so it's important that people have right information.
I think that is a great point. And since you brought it up, I think I'm going to ask you what your definition is of sexual violence. As you mentioned, there's a lot of a lot of different thoughts about what that is. And I think especially with young people, they look at things in a completely different way, probably from the way that I do, or maybe even the way that you do. So it's just to define terms.
So sexual violence, the way I try to explain to people in general, sexual violence happens on a spectrum. So it's not one thing. It is several things that fall on the spectrum. And it can start with language, right? And I think that that's a really important thing that young people in particular have to know, because we are really loose with our language sometimes. And so there are ways that you can use language that create a violence, that makes, first of all, it feel violent, right, to experience it, but also that can create a violent environment. And so, and it's also harassment, right? So we start off with language, you have harassment, and you work your way up. There are, street harassment, when people are catcalling you on the street or following you on the street. That's why the book is called Hey Shorty, because it's about street harassment, right? And I'm sure many of the women in the audience have heard those words or some variation of them. So sexual violence isn't one thing. It's a body of things that happen that are a violation of your body or of your person in a sexual nature.
And I think that is really appropriate. And the other place that I think, especially for our students, where they may experience it is in the digital world.
Absolutely.
You don't have to be approached on the street.
Yeah.
And I don't know that young people really do much of that anymore, but in the digital world, on Snapchat, on Instagram, I mean, if you read the comments under some people's posts,
the comments, and then the other thing that happens in the digital world is like revenge porn, right? That is a rampant problem where people, young people are. Social media is just obviously this interesting tool that can be both good and evil. Thank God we didn't have it when we were young. But also you have young people who are exploring their sexuality and exploring their bodies and their relationships, and so they're taking pictures of themselves and sharing them, and then something breaks down in that relationship, and then you have somebody who has pictures of you. So there's plenty of cases of people sharing that on the internet, and so there's lots of violence that's not what we think of traditionally as violence.
And I agree with you. I have a couple of teens who you met, and I tell them all the time, no pictures.
The internet is written in ink. It's not written in pencil. Once it's out there, you cannot take it back.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, because I think it's important to define terms, especially for our students. So I want to talk a little bit about you and kind of how you got to this place, how you got to do this. What inspired you to work to improve the lives of girls who undergo extreme hardship? How did you...
It wasn't necessarily about girls who undergo extreme hardships as much as it was girls who look like me, black and brown girls. So it's twofold, right? I think that, I know for a fact my life is as rich as it is because I had people who interjected themselves in my life. I had a family, first of all, and a mother, a grandfather who made sure I was exposed to a lot of things and had a lot of various experiences. And so it made, even though we didn't have a lot of money, I had a lot of experiences at a young age. And so I wanted to be able to do that same thing with young people, particularly young black girls and black and brown girls. But also as a survivor, and I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse as well as sexual assault as an adult. And so as a young person who did not know how to navigate that experience, those experiences, I did not know what to do with those feelings. I didn't understand them. And I didn't have language at all. And then nobody around me talked about it at all. And so knowing what I knew and how I held that and the ways in which it interrupted my life, it became, and this is like an abbreviated version, but it became very important to me to have something that existed in the world that could change the trajectory of a young black girl's life. So that you don't have to hold this thing until you're 30 and 40 and can finally afford therapy and, do those things. We can start undoing some of that now. When I think about what my life would have looked like if somebody had told me at 12 that this is not your fault,
and you're not alone, I would have been a different person.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And I think that is interesting because I think one of the good things is that now I think we have language to talk about this.
Yeah.
There can always be more, but we have resources.
Yeah, we do.
To help here at the college and in the community. So,
and that's really the beauty of Me Too, right? The first thing Me Too does is give us language. It gives us a way to talk about a whole spectrum of things that could have happened, because when I am in a room full of people who are survivors, we don't exchange the details of what happened to us, because it's the collective trauma that really bonds us. It's not whether this happened or that happened or, what you experienced. It's what your experience left you with. And so giving you not just language to talk about it, but a starting point to talk about it is really important. And a starting point, in a community of people to join together with to talk about it is really important.
Absolutely. Can you tell us the story of how the actual Me Too came about?
The word? Yes. Yeah. So the story is so unglamorous. It was really my inability to say Me Too that brought the words to me. I'd come up in an organization called the 21st Century Youth Leadership Movement, which is how I met Brother Daniel. And I came up through the organization as a child, and then when I finished college, I went to work for them. And while I was maybe 22, so I was really young. I had a young girl in the camp who I call Heaven publicly, who was just a handful, to say the least, right? She was a hellion, as they say in the South. And so I tried to keep her really close to me because, that's what we do, right? Give her special tasks and make sure I follow up with her all throughout the day. And so we had these sessions every year called Sister to Sister and Brother to Brother, where we would separate the girls and boys and, give the girls a chance to talk about whatever they wanted. And so even though we did not talk about sexual violence in public, every year at Sister to Sister, there was some girl or more than one that disclosed about their experience with sexual violence. And, I was in those sessions. I never told, because although I love these people and I felt safe with them, I'm also Caribbean. And in my Caribbean family, the number one rule is your business, our business is our business. That's right. And so it was scary to me to think about talking about something so personal in this group, but I loved being a part of it. So I recreated the same experience when I was in charge of the camp. So she came to camp, and she came to Sister to Sister, and I watched her in that session become me. When I was that age, I watched her start to shrink, and this is a girl with a lot of mouth, right, who's always into something, and I watched her shrink, and I watched her try to figure out if she should say something. I could tell the decisions that were going on in her mind because I'd been that pattern. And she never said anything. She didn't say anything in the group. But then the next day when she saw me, and I usually sought her out. That day she sought me out. And she was like, Miss T, I got to talk to you, Miss T. I got to talk to you now. And I kept putting her off, which was not usual for her. And then finally she literally just cornered me like, I have to talk to you. And I just remember she just went into this whole story about how her mother's boyfriend had molested her. And I knew this was coming. I knew that's what she had to talk to me about. I did not want to deal with it. Because up until that point, I had been thinking about the things that happened to me in my head. I wrote about it in my journal. I'd never articulated it. I'd never said it out loud because saying it out loud made it real, right? And so I'm horrified, really, as she's talking to me, and I'm thinking, like, I'm not a social worker or a therapist. Like, I don't know what to say, and I don't want to say the wrong thing. But what was playing in the back of my head was, this happened to me too. This thing that she was talking about, like, not the details of it, but the pain in her eyes was very familiar. I knew exactly what she was feeling and what she was holding. But in that moment when somebody is, just you have so many things going through your brain, it just didn't feel like enough to say that. I was just kept processing, and then I sent her to go speak to another. I cut her off, and I sent her to another counselor to help her. And I said, I can't help you. You got to go to another counselor. That moment literally just haunted me. Right? I love children. I love these children. I love this little girl. And up until that moment, I thought I was equipped for this work. And it made me realize that I wasn't quite equipped. And the ways that I wasn't equipped, I couldn't get trained into. Right? It wasn't something that was missing in my training. I had come up by some of the most amazing elders had trained me to take leadership. It was work that I needed to do for myself. If I was going to stand in the midst of these young people and say, I love you, and you can trust me, and I'm here for you, I needed to be able to I had to deal with my stuff so that I could come and be prepared to deal with theirs. So initially, I just started figuring out what my own journey looked like, right? And a few years later, I started doing, it wasn't called anything, but we started doing these girl groups where we just bring the girls together to share safe space kind of thing. And that eventually evolved into a Rites of Passage program that evolved into an organization. And in that organization is where we gave birth to Me Too. And I use those words because literally it just haunted me that I just could not say it. I wanted to say it so badly to her, and I couldn't. And I realized that when I was finally able to say it, the whole world opened up. The first time I was able to stand in the room and say, this happened to me too, and I watched it trickle through the whole room, and everybody said, yeah, me too, me too, me too, me too, just through the whole, like wildfire. And it takes one person. And I realized this is what empathy looks like. This is also what courage looks like. This is also what healing looks like. And so I just tried to figure out how to package that. And I was trained as an organizer. So it came naturally that any work that I would do that was community work would be focused on the individual, but it also had to be focused on the community because I was trained to think about people individually, but also collectively. And so that's how it expanded to movement work.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it's a long story.
Thank you for sharing. I think that, and that's interesting because you talk about, and I know you met a lot of our students who are social work students, who are psychology students, who I have staff in the Women's Center who want to do this work for a profession.
Yeah.
But I thought it was interesting that you talked about it wasn't really about your training, but about
let me tell you something. So Girls for Gender Equity, the organization that wrote the book Hey Shorty, is founded by a woman named Joanne Smith. Amazing person. And she has a quote that I use all the time, which is, we come to the work because we are the work. And it's
I'm gonna use that.
Really, it's right, because it hits it right on the head. We come to this work because we are the work. And if we are the work, we need the work just as much as the people we serve need it. You can't come into this work thinking, I have the answers to you, I got it all figured out, and think you can wall yourself off from that because you will fail.
Right. Right. And I think that's something that a lot of my social work interns talk about self-care.
Yeah.
And having to do that in addition to working with, clients and working with constituents. So
mandatory.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to talk about some of the activism that you've done besides Me Too, because as you mentioned, you have a long and storied history. So, in addition, we're going to get to Me Too, but can you talk about some of the other movements that you worked on? You mentioned a couple of them in your story.
Yeah, I came into 21st Century Leadership Movement at 14 years old. 21st Century was founded by veterans of the civil rights and Black Power and labor movements of the 60s and 70s. And those elders in that movement, their whole purpose was to pass on this legacy of work and make sure it continued. And so I started off very early in New York. I think one of the things that's bad about us not having social media when we were younger is that a lot of the movement history from the 80s and 90s is not captured.
Right.
It's not captured anywhere. So young people think that we went from the civil rights movement to Black Lives Matter.
Right. And there's nothing in between.
And there was nothing in between. And so it's very especially New York students, you need to know that in New York City in the late 80s and 90s, we were very politicized. And so and a lot of us, I'm 45, and a lot of us were politicized by cases like Yusef Hawkins, you know, who was our Trayvon Martin, if you will. He was murdered in Brooklyn, in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, by a group of white boys from the neighborhood who thought he was trying to talk to a white girl in the neighborhood. In that case, a lot of us were politicized around that. And then there were several police brutality cases.
Sean Bell here
right?
from our community.
And Sean Bell was in the 2000s, I think, right? Yes. I'm talking about Abner Louima. I'm talking about Eleanor Bumpers. I'm talking about like sisters, 80s, early 90s, where we were in the street protesting police brutality. So a lot of my early organizing work was about racial injustice and economic injustice. I campaigned for David Jenkins, and I was leading protests to get more summer youth money, you know, put into the budget so that young people in the inner city could have jobs. These are the things I did as teenagers. And I did that. My foundation was 21st Century because I was coming there 3 times a year to get this training. And I also was raised, I come from a Pan-Africanist family, so it didn't just pop out of nowhere. I had a grandfather who was a Garveyite who raised me, even though I was Catholic. His stipulation was, if you're going to read the Bible, you got to read a history book.
All right.
So my grandfather they came before Columbus and before the Mayflower in the 7th grade.
Wow.
Yeah, I was a radical kid. I was definitely a kid in 7th grade, like, my grandfather said Abraham Lincoln and free the slaves, you know? Yeah, I was that kid. So
my son had a moment like that recently.
Oh no, it was, and I also had a black feminist mother who wrapped me in black feminist literature. And so these are the things that shape me. And I'm grateful, I'm deeply grateful and appreciative because the way we develop leadership, or the way leadership comes to fruition nowadays, is very different than my understanding of how you become a leader. And it's not about your Twitter followers. You know, I'm rooted in a legacy of work and just ideology, and I'm also accountable to a community. So if I stand up here and say something wrong, Brother James is going to text me. He's going to call me on my phone and say, "Sister, we got to talk about this thing." That means something to me. So the work that I did prior to Me Too, and the reason why Me Too, when I started doing it around sexual violence, it made sense. It didn't make sense to me that we didn't organize around this issue. We organize around everything, and I mean everything, right? And so I was in an environment where if there was a community issue, there was a community response, and that was always the case. And when I would bring this forward as a community issue, it's one thing to say, I have some students in my class and they've experienced sexual violence. It's another thing to say that 3/4 of the girls in my class have experienced sexual violence. And 100% of those girls live in this community. Those are our children. So what's happening out there? This is not, we can put Band-Aids on and we can get them counseling, and send them to therapy. Fine, that has to happen. But what's happening in the environment that they're coming up in our community, that is allowing this to happen? And why aren't we talking about this collectively? Why aren't we trying to think of solutions? We are creating space for this violence to happen. And then you want to recruit these same people to stand on the front lines and fight for racial and economic injustice, and they are wounded. And we're already wounded by the oppression of racism, right? And classism, and there's so many things that we're dealing with, these isms. And then on top of that, these people are carrying these other wounds. So it started to become bizarre to me that nobody wanted to talk about this as a community issue. When I can give you anecdotal and actual evidence that this is a problem. And that's why it needed to be a movement. And it needed to be a movement that centered the people who had the lived experience. This couldn't be some people coming from other places and saying, "Oh, let's figure this out." This had to be people who went through it, who said, "I went through this and I survived and I have some solutions. I want to be a part of what the solutions look like." Because that's also a part of our healing process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk about the growth and development of Me Too, because it's come a long way since 2006 when you actually originally started to use the term.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, in October of 2017, so that's an 11-year stretch, Alyssa Milano, the actress, adopted the term, and
She tweeted it out.
She tweeted it, and in response to a lot of the allegations of sexual harassment, sexual assault within the academy, and specifically by Harvey Weinstein. And so that really kind of brought the term to national fore, which I'm sure is good and is possibly bad, I'm not sure. But what does it mean to have a grassroots movement take on a life of its own and grow into this?
You know, I mean, I've spent the last year navigating that, right? At first, I was very afraid that it would be consumed, and that the things that we started with and the ideas that we started with would be erased. And if I had not been inserted in the conversation, they clearly would have been erased, right? But I always think things happen when they're supposed to, because what happened, first of all, was Alyssa tweets the thing, and then all these celebrities respond, and then more people start coming forward, and everyday people start tweeting it, and so it becomes a media phenomenon. Well, in the first, I want somebody to do a study about this so badly, because I think it's fascinating. In the first month, I'll say, but definitely in the first 2 weeks that Me Too went viral, the media did not come running to me. I went on Democracy Now, which is, not hard.
A small but very important.
I mean, it is, and but we are. It's a movement space, right? So that was sort of a given. And Roland Martin and places like that. But the national news media did not come running. So it was Alyssa who tweeted it, but it was also Alyssa who brought me on Good Morning America with her. And then it was also Alyssa who said on Good Morning America when they tried to cancel, they put me in a little corner in the box. You know,
yes, you were that little caption.
I did a 20-minute interview and they reduced it down to I coined the phrase "Me Too." It was really corny in the corner there. And then she came back and said, "We would not be here if not for the work of Tarana Burke." So when the media started going to these celebrities and these mainstream folks to ask them to contextualize the moment, they couldn't do it.
Right.
And it's not their work, right? They were literally just survivors telling their stories. And so over time, what happened was then they started saying, well, is anybody else? And I'm just sitting in the corner of me, I'm my 45-year-old black self, whenever you're ready. And then over time, people started saying, well, let's talk to this woman who founded it. Let's see what this is about. And so it became a perfect storm. And so it's been a struggle, don't get me wrong. The struggle is, it's still what the work is, because the beautiful thing and the validating thing is that what we did on the grassroots and what we did in the community level is still needed at this national level.
Absolutely.
The same thing. People need the space to talk about, to think about, to process, and to be seen and heard and believed. They also need movement. They need to be activated around this work. So it's not very different, and that's why our vision hasn't changed and our goals haven't really changed. But what's happening in the media is that they don't want a narrative like that. They don't want a narrative that says we're trying to kill people. No, so hashtag Me Too keeps being keeps being weaponized in this way that's oh, well, who's the Me Too movement going to take down next? And that kind of thing.
Yes.
So that's the challenge of it, but yeah.
And since you mentioned that, I'm gonna skip ahead because that is probably the main criticism that we hear in the media, and as we I think probably talk amongst ourselves about the movement, is that hashtag Me Too is being used to take down powerful and prominent black men in our community.
So now Now it's black men.
Now it's black men. Before it was just men. It's, become a bird. Oh, you got Me Too, right? Like, you're kind of, as you said, weaponizing it. What's your response to that, given that, we know that black men have been unfairly targeted by institutional racism. We know that, and that's a fact. But how do you, what's your response to that?
My response to that is always that, one, it pains me that we have an inability to have a nuanced conversation. Because there is some nuance to this. There is nobody who can doubt the long and horrid history of black men in America when it comes to sexual violence, of black men being falsely accused, mostly by white women, by people using that to target black men, from Emmett Till to the Central Park Five. We've seen it happen historically over and over and over again. And so I understand the visceral reaction to protect black men and say, wait, this is what they always do. Right. But here's what else, and that's true. It's absolutely true. But here's what else is true. In every single community, sexual violence happens within the community. It's intra-communal. Yes, there's many occasions where it comes from outside of the community, but if we're talking statistically, if there's a statistic that says that 60% of black women will experience sexual violence by the time they turn 18. That's a staggering number. And that 60%, 90% of them will be sexually assaulted by a black man. That's a reality. That is not to say that there's any special depravity about black men. That's not to say that our men are extra predatory. The same statistics apply in white communities, Asian communities, Latino communities, every community. There's nothing about our black men that are extra predatory. However, when we talk about this conversation as a targeting black men, what it does is immediately remove black women. There has to be a way for us to understand and uplift and protect black men from false accusations, particularly ones that come from outside of our communities, while acknowledging that the sexual violence that happens within our community is real and it is happening largely not exclusively, but largely at the hands of black men. What happens is we get stuck at one place. Right. I actually think this argument that Me Too is targeting black men is comical at this point. Yes. Because the reality is we only pay attention to what we know and what we recognize, right? So folks knew Me Too was out here, of course. It's been everywhere. So you've heard of it. But so now people are talking, when they talk about R. Kelly, it's like, when are you going to have a Harvey Weinstein documentary? You need another one? Right. The third one just came out in Sundance in January. That's correct. We talked about Harvey Weinstein ad nauseum over the past 2 years. For the past 2 years, this whole movement wouldn't have started if not for Harvey Weinstein. And yet you still have people saying, what about Harvey Weinstein? You know why you don't know about Harvey Weinstein? Because you wasn't paying attention until it was somebody who you recognized. So you see a documentary about R. Kelly. Let me give you a perfect example to sum this up. We have been talking about R. Kelly for 20 years. Absolutely. 20 years. And I can show you articles that I wrote 10 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago about R. Kelly and other women. We've been talking about R. Kelly for 20 years. There have been, in that 20 years, 7 exposés written about R. Kelly. 7. The Chicago Sun-Times, Miami Herald, the Village Voice, several, and I mean in detail, in depth. Atlanta. Yes. Exposés that newspapers have done. 7 in 20 years. There have been at least 3 court cases, 3 high-profile court cases around R. Kelly in 20 years, with him not being convicted in any of those. One or 2 were civil cases. There have been so many articles written about R. Kelly in 20 years. There was an international movement started around R. Kelly. And then you have Me Too. And then we had the documentary. It took 20 years, 7 exposés, hundreds of articles, an international movement, and a documentary to get us talking about R. Kelly. That's correct. To get us even recognizing that what he does, what he did, and who he is predatory. Conversely, it took 2 articles to bring down Harvey Weinstein. articles that were both written in 2017.
Right.
Now, the rumors about Harvey Weinstein have been around for years.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But the minute that somebody decided to get proactive, the minute that white folks decided we've had enough, and they got proactive, and they wrote 2 articles, the New York Times and the New Yorker, it was like, it's enough, he's out. We couldn't get that for R. Kelly because his victims are black girls. So when black men stand up and say, why are you picking on R. Kelly, and why are you trying to bring that black man down, that's bullshit. There's no other way to sugarcoat that. That's straight up and down bullshit. What you're saying to me is, we don't care about black girls either. So you'd rather protect a person. And who the hell is R. Kelly, for real? Seriously. Like, if you're going to put it all on the line for somebody,
Is that the hill you want to die on?
that's the hill you want to die. I'm just always looking at these people arguing me on the internet like, why you don't talk about Woody Allen? People been talking about Woody Allen. People been talking about, y'all just didn't care about it until we started talking about a black person. But you will do anything not to protect the black woman. The same people out here with all this red, black, and green all across their social media and protect our queens, while we not queens once we get sexually assaulted. Don't get me started. This thing makes me hot.
Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord.
It's annoying.
And we're gonna cue up the third video. We're jumping around. We're gonna cue up the
Let's all
third.
calm down and watch
Yes,
the video.
Lord. We're gonna take a moment. Let's play the third video clip about R. Kelly and Tarana Burke, please.
So on this particular issue,
Don't pay attention to my hair.
ramifications and multiple layers. How do you perceive this series, Surviving R. Kelly, perhaps being a game changer in bringing to account somebody who's had so many accusations leveled against him?
What the documentary has done has brought into the mainstream what we've been talking about on social media, in our private lives, in various journalistic efforts for the last 2 decades, and it's finally brought to light these allegations all in a consolidated way so people can see them. And I think that the reaction is that people are appalled and surprised that there hasn't been more attention paid to these women who've come forward over the years to talk about these allegations. And so now we're starting to see a shift in the conversation, and we're starting to see people talking about accountability, both from R. Kelly and from the people that support him.
So let's just put out a few of the issues, a few of the accusations. For instance, he once called himself the Pied Piper of R&B. Obviously, Pied Piper is kind of a fictional character who lures children with his music. He tells his protege, Aaliyah's first album, age ain't nothing but a number, and apparently tried marrying her when she was 15 years old and, at the time, 12 years his junior. How was that allowed to happen? And there are plenty of other allegations that one writer has said indicts not just him, but the society around him, the society at large, that allowed it to continue in plain sight.
Well, it's allowed to happen because people, again, are more invested in the bottom line and more invested in money and in fame and proximity to fame than they are in people's lives and the lives of black women and girls. And so the 100% of the women and girls who are accusing R. Kelly are black and Latino. And we've seen historically that our claims, particularly around sexual violence or physical violence, are often falling on deaf ears. So I think it's multi-layered, but the main reasons why it was allowed to happen is that, particularly at the time when, around Aaliyah in the 90s and the early aughts, this is somebody who was a very successful R&B singer who brought in a lot of money for his record label, who was beloved in the community, and who was abusing a group of people who generally get left behind.
So he's obviously strongly denied it, and he has settled many, many of the accusations against him over these last few years. Now, we understand that since the series, law enforcement in Chicago and also in Georgia,
Atlanta.
Yeah, in Atlanta, they're looking into it and they're asking more and more people to come forward and give them any evidence if they intend to pursue a case.
Now, a lot has happened since this interview.
Yeah, right. That was like the first week after.
Please, yes. And I think every day I struggle to channel my inner Gayle King and remain calm in the face of all types of foolishness. And so since this interview has happened, the Cook County grand jury handed down 10 indictments against R. Kelly for aggravated criminal sexual abuse involving just 4 victims. But as you mentioned, he's been outspoken against this for quite some time. This is not a new thing. Um, and in the Gayle King interviews, not only did they interview R. Kelly, but they interviewed the 2 young ladies that he is currently in a relationship with. And that got pretty heated as well. And a lot of people say, oh, well, they're brainwashed, or they're not thinking, or there's a cult. But I thought that the interplay between him and the 2 young ladies, and between Gayle King and the 2 young ladies, was very telling about how we handle this in our community. Because Gayle King, God bless her, was very diplomatic. But he tried, I think, to hold R. Kelly to task. He tried to speak to the 2 young ladies with compassion, but while being truthful. How do we, in our community, in our everyday lives, with people that we actually know, how do we do the same thing? How do we foster that accountability while creating space?
So I think the number one thing that people don't understand about this movement to mute R. Kelly or to make sure that he does not continue to do the things that he's been accused of is because of the R. Kellys that are around us. Black women, quite frankly, need to see somebody be accountable. There's never, I mean, we spent almost 2 years now watching. So Harvey Weinstein, speaking of what are we doing about Harvey Weinstein, he's going to court. He's going on trial. His trial starts soon. And he makes it off, right? Because it's really hard to convict sexual assault. But I remember when they arrested him and they had that perk walk and they had, and I've talked to some of his accusers, these actresses, and they were not happy necessarily, but there was a catharsis that they felt. And I just wonder, when do we get that? Because I'm going to tell you what I think about a lot. I think about when folks go to drug rehab, when they come home from drug rehab, the number one piece of advice that you're given is not to go back to the places where you use the drugs, right? You don't go back into the communities where you use because there's fear that you might, be susceptible again. When I think about how many of us live and work and worship and generally dwell in the spaces where we were harmed, and we have no recourse, and we can't move, and we can't quit, right? We have to keep going back to the spaces where we were harmed, and we have to do that while actively watching people not care and not work to make those spaces safer. So when I think R. Kelly is one individual, but it's a roadmap for us for how we need to approach it when we see it in our community. We need to organize. That's what we've been watching. We've been watching collective organizing to remove him from power. So this is not about an individual. This is about power. And this is about an unchecked accumulation of power. And if you sit right now and think about the many different pockets in our community where there are unchecked accumulations of power. Right now, the pastor in Brooklyn, y'all know about this case of the pastor in Brooklyn who molested his son, he was molesting his daughter. And then when you peel back a layer, you find out that the senior pastor, who was his father, also molested his sister. That's a seat of power that goes unchecked. And there are many of them, and it doesn't always look like a famous person. It can look like your father. It can look like a teacher. But we have to know that there is a model that says when we see it, we call it out, we call it out collectively, and we don't have to stand for it. We don't have to stand for it. We don't have to listen to it on our radio, but we don't have to stand for it in our community. And quite often, the people who are being victimized don't have the wherewithal to do that. But it's happening all around us, and we are almost trained to turn a blind eye. Our business is our business. Right. Those are the things that's poking us to that. There are people now who are upset about R. Kelly because they feel like, why are you doing all of this about R. Kelly when there's all of these white people out here who doing all of these things? Why are you caring about white people? I made a statement on Twitter, and they tried to take it and twist it because I said, why is it my job to go after white men? but it was in the middle of a conversation and somebody pulled it out and tried to use it against me saying, oh, you see, the Me Too movement don't care about white men. They only care about black men. No, I care about black people. And I know too many black men who are not predators, who are upstanding men, who protect their families and protect their communities. And those men, just like the women in my community, do not want predators in their community. So what men should be saying is, thank you for doing this R. Kelly stuff. Thank you for calling it out so the world knows that we are not like this.
Right.
He is not representative of what black manhood looks like. As opposed to wanting to fight with me and say, why you bothering that brother? No. That's not how this works. This is not how community works. It's just, but I'm gonna tell you where I have settled with this. I feel like, it's just like anything. When you shake up a system, when you start peeling back layers, people have to get upset. It's like when you poke a bear, or anything like that. People go crazy first and they get really upset, and then you're gonna have to calm down. Because all I'm gonna keep doing is holding up the mirror. You can get as upset as you want to, but you're going to keep looking in this mirror.
That's right.
And you're going to see yourself in this mirror, and you're going to see your mama in this mirror, your auntie, your cousins, your uncles. We're going to have to look in the mirror in our community. And it's hard, and it's always somebody who has to do it. I'm not saying I want to die for it. Be clear. Y'all, some folks are crazy out here with these death threats. But I am saying that as long as I have strength and breath, I'm going to keep holding this mirror, because as a byproduct of what I created for us, other people in the world are able to find healing. Other people in the world are find vision for a way forward. And I am so deeply appreciative of that. And I always say the work I do centers us, but it's not to the exclusion of anybody else.
Of course.
Right?
Of course.
But my job is to hold that mirror. My job is to keep coming back and talking to us. So it's not my job to go after Harvey Weinstein. That's somebody else's job. I can stand up and say, yeah, he did that, and he should go to jail and blah, blah, blah. But my focus is what is going to make my community more safe and less vulnerable.
Amen.
So that's what I mean when I say it's not my job to go after white men. It's my job to stand with black men and stand with black women or black people, or however you identify, and say we will not tolerate this in our community. Even if you look like me.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. And just so that we're even-handed, we're going to cue up that second clip, which is what you said, you lending your support. This clip is in support of Dr. Christine Blasey Ford during the Kavanaugh hearings. Let's take a look.
The Supreme Court of the United States is one of the biggest power structures there is. We must protect it from being corrupted by this man Kavanaugh, this man Trump, who has shown such little regard for more than half of this country's population, and has made it clear how he would wield his power and influence if confirmed. Dr. Blasey Ford, like Professor Anita Hill before you, we applaud you and your courage. We stand with you, and we will not let your labor be in vain. You, like so many other survivors before you, have labored with your stories and your testimony and your courage and your tenacity. And now we implore you to lay your burden down. It is theirs to bear, not yours and not ours. This is a momentum moment, and I hope Kavanaugh and Trump and others like them know that we aren't going anywhere anytime soon.
Right. What she said. What struck me about this, when I saw this, was that you mentioned Anita Hill.
Absolutely.
Who, it's kind of like, what year is it? This happened. Didn't this happen before? I'm feeling some deja vu. Exactly. And so, do you ever think that the more things change, the more they stay the same?
Yes, I do to some degree. And although when Anita Hill happened, so I was a freshman in college when Anita Hill happened.
That was in 1991.
Yeah, and I remember it so clearly because we were just tuned in to that. What I don't remember around Dr. Hill was people in the street protesting. I don't remember people putting their bodies on the line. I don't remember people standing up in droves like this. And I think because that didn't happen for her, the lesson that we learned from that is that we have to do it now. I also think that Dr. Blasey Ford is a white woman who, and just we are trained in this country to respond to the vulnerability of white women. I say it all the time. Yeah. It's like we're hardwired for it, right? That's why when Harvey Weinstein broke, there was such a reaction because they're like, "Oh my God, Miss Anna, you okay?" Right? You got this delicate, beautiful, rich white lady, and y'all, no, we can't have that, right? They couldn't have that. They could not see these women who they put on pedestals with these stories. And so we saw a real disparity in the way in which people responded to Dr. Ford. And I think some of it is time. I think some of it over time we learned a lesson from that. But even then, even after this, people were saying, well, the difference between her and Anita Hill is Anita Hill was so stoic and she was so hard and she was hard for people to relate to. How many black women have heard that about anything? Yeah. So in that regard, I definitely believe the more things change, the more things stay the same. But I do think that, like many other black women before her, do y'all know that the reason why we have sexual harassment laws in this country is because of a black woman? I need people to, and plus her name went right out of my head as soon as I said it. You need to look up the case. The Supreme Court case that gave us sexual harassment laws in this country when they didn't exist was based on a black woman who actually wasn't sexually harassed, but she was sexually assaulted by her boss at work at her bank and sued, and that's how we got these laws. People don't realize that. The black women have been laboring around this for decades. And so I can't speak the name of Dr. Ford without speaking the name of Anita Hill. But although I felt deeply for Dr. Ford, and what she did was courageous, incredibly courageous. And so that's what I'm saying. It doesn't have to be to the exclusion of anybody. But at the end of the day, Me Too is a survivors movement. And it is for all survivors. The censoring part means that when I have an opportunity and you give me a microphone, I'm going to say black. I'm not going to say people of color. I'm not just going to say the marginalized. I'm going to say I want to talk about black and brown women and girls, people, whatever. That is part of my responsibility. That responsibility doesn't mean that somebody loses out, ever, right? Because of my training, I have the ability to do that. Speaking black and talking about blackness and black people and protecting us doesn't mean other people have to be protected. It means this is where I start and everybody knows where I stand. Very, very good. Y'all keep putting these pictures up. Before we came out, we were talking, the two of us, about engaging not just women or black women, but engaging men in this conversation. Yeah. And I mentioned to you that I think in our York College community, our students care very deeply about many, many things. And we wanted to do some work on this topic in terms of how do we engage men and what it means to be an ally. As we do this work, what role do allies play? And how can we engage men in the fight to end sexual violence? So I get this question a lot. And the first thing I like to clarify when I'm asked this question is that the reason why we say this is a survivors movement is because it's not a woman's movement. And I think that a lot of times when the question comes up about engaging men, it's only from the perspective as an ally. What can men do to be better so that they can, help eradicate sexual violence? We have to first step back and acknowledge that men are survivors. That's right. And so men's first role in the Me Too movement is to get what they need just like everybody else. Their first role in Me Too is to have the same kind of space, to be vulnerable in the same kind of ways, and get the same kind of resources that women and folks who identify as women and whoever get. And if we don't say that, I think men feel ostracized. They feel like, well, that's not for me. I wish somebody would say, I get letters all the time from men saying, I wish somebody would say something for men survivors like me too. And I said, no, baby, this is for you. This is it. Women are at the forefront because we're always at the forefront, right? But I actually think because of that, male survivors actually have a heavier burden, if you will. Everybody has a burden for sure, but and particularly black men and men of color in communities of color, the burden of trying to figure out what to do and what does this mean to your masculinity and how do you get resources and how do you come out and figure out where you can be vulnerable so you can grapple with this thing that happened to you, they just are almost non-existent. And so it's important to me, and I don't think we've actually done a great job at that, but it's important to me that we do a better job of making sure that men understand that this is a space for them too. Absolutely. So, yeah, that being said, as allies, obviously the other role of men in this work is to be allies and advocates. This is a difficult time, right? It's a difficult time because all of this is new for everybody. Right. We've just upended the whole thing, right? So all of a sudden, you keep getting these questions like, well, how are we supposed to date now after Me Too? And how are we supposed to, and my first answer is, well, what did you do before Me Too? Right? Like, were you just out here knocking women over and, clubbing them and dragging them back to the house? Like, I would hope that before this hashtag, that you behaved in ways that weren't, but what it has done is, it's not that their behavior shifted, it's just shined a light on things that we tolerated, that we put up with. So even street harassment and regular harassment, I used to do an exercise when I worked in the school system, like with high school students and junior high school students, where I would sit the guys, and this is to understand how to be allies. I would sit the guys on the outside of a fistbowl, right, situation, just a circle, and put the girls on the inside. And I would make them listen without interjection at all and ask the girls a few questions. One of the questions was, walk me through all the decisions you make from the time you get up to the time you go back to school in relation to your safety. Because I think that boys don't have to think about this. And boys and men don't realize that level of thought that goes through it. That when we say, where am I going today? Oh, I gotta go past the so-and-so, the basketball court, so let me wear something longer to cover my butt. Let me not wear this tight outfit because so-and-so always try to smack me on the butt, so I don't want to cause that. Like, these decisions, let me not go, I gotta get home before 6 o'clock because it's gonna get dark, and then I'm gonna have to walk that way, and if I walk that way, I'm gonna run into, we think through our safety
10, 12,
all day.
Steps ahead. Yeah.
We always thinking ahead about how do we get back to our home safely. That's not to say that the men around us are predators, but we all deal with toxic masculinity, right? And they have been so many men have been socialized in ways that say that their needs are more important than ours, and their desires are more important. And so when they see something, they want something, they just feel like they can have it. So what has to happen first around allyship is that we need a re-socialization. We need a re-education, right? We need a new understanding of what it is to be in interpersonal relationships with each other. That means we have to start talking, it sounds basic, but we have to start talking more about what respect and boundaries look like. And accountability. Because the other problem I think that makes particularly black men nervous in this moment, again, rightfully so, is they are not just falsely accused of sexual assault, but they are first to be targeted for anything criminal.
Anything, yeah.
Right? So I remember when my little brother, who's now 33, but was in the 7th grade, there was him, another boy, and a girl were play fighting. And my brother and the other boy started tickling the girl, like just tickling her. She got upset and said, stop, and they wouldn't stop, and they kept, being kids. A school official came in, pulled them apart. They got in trouble. Fine, because they had done something wrong. They called the police. I'll never forget this. They called the police, and they were trying to charge my little brother with sexual assault. 7th grade. for something that other children would do and we call it playful, we may give them, we may reprimand them and give them a lesson about, we might maybe even get suspension of detention and give them a lesson about how, boundaries, whatever. But my brother and that other child weren't afforded that opportunity. Right. Because they were little black children. So it's not like this is not a reality for black men. And so we have to have conversations about what accountability looks like in our community outside of law enforcement. Yeah. And it has to be spaces that because we are also trained to think about crime and punishment, period. There's no in-between. Right. And this is not necessarily, but there are so many things that fall on the spectrum of sexual violence that don't rise to the level of crime. Our thinking, the framework we should be using is about harm and harm reduction. We have to figure out new ways to reduce harm so that when these girls are talking about the 13 steps they take to keep themselves safe, that we're trying to reduce those numbers. We're trying to make sure that the way we train our young people to interact interpersonally, make sure that we reduce those numbers. And so if you think in terms of harm and harm reduction and you take the case of my little brother, what actually happens is you don't call the police. You sit him in a room with another black man. I'm not being sexist, but I know what works and doesn't sometimes. You sit him in the room and you say, listen, young man, I need you to understand the consequences of your actions. Because I'm here, and I've done this so many times. I love you, and I want to protect you. It's not going to always be me. That's right. So you can't behave like that, right? And you give that child a lesson. Our children, the reason why we named our organization Just Be is because our children never get an opportunity to just be, to just live and experience life and make mistakes and learn from those mistakes and bounce back. We don't get that opportunity. So I want people to understand that I would never create anything or operate in any framework that would further criminalize black people or anybody, ever. But it's going to take a lot of work for us to talk about that kind of accountability, and we need institutions to help, really. That means that schools have to think differently, and colleges have to think differently, and churches have to think differently, right? If you start having those models of accountability set up in those institutions, then we can mirror them in our homes. But it's a lot of work. It is, right? It's just a lot of work. But I believe in that work, and I believe having these kind of conversations helps spark somebody else. I don't want to be here in 5 years, and by that I mean I should not be the face or voice of Me Too in 5 years. That's counterproductive. I should spend the next 5 years institutionalizing the work, talking about the vision, and making sure that there are young people out here who get it and who are thinking way ahead of me. My literal prayer is that there is some unicorn, some child out here who listens to me and says, you know what, what she's saying is okay, but what if we did it this way? Something I haven't even thought of yet, right? That's really what my work is about, laying the groundwork so that one of y'all bright people can come along and carry this to the next level. And so, no, we still think about crime and punishment now, but if we keep using different language and talking about different frameworks, we can move in a different direction.
And that is so appropriate because I'm coming to my last question for you, and then we're gonna open up the microphones here for a couple of audience Q&A. So you guys get your questions ready. But my last question for you is, so what is next? What's next for #MeToo? How can students, community members, good citizens, what can they do to be a part of a movement? And how can young people, with limited means really affect change?
I'll start with that and work backwards. Historically, young people with limited means have always affected change. Right? If you just go only as far back as the civil rights movement and you look at the children of SNCC and the young people who were active, these were people from low-wealth communities who came together collectively and organized. They came together around an issue to organize. So there are numerous ways that young people, regardless of your means, can affect change. This is about thinking outside of the box. So I'm not saying all of this so that y'all can get together and put together a Take Back the Night in April. right? That's fine. But I want folks to think more expansively. I want you to think about what your lived experience is, both in school and at home and in community, and where are the gaps? Because that's really all we did. We saw a gap and filled it. There was a deficit in resources in our community, and there was a lack of conversation in our community, and there was nobody speaking healing into the community. That or things like that are happening right now in your community. So if you want to be active, think about what's around you and think about what's missing. That's the first place to start. And when you find, and don't think you have to have, you know, I get people all the time like, I want to start a movement. How do I start a movement? That's not realistic. Dr. Kingdom sit down and was like, okay, let me tell you what we're going to do. He started fighting and it grew into a movement. And so you don't have to, this moment that we're in says that, you know, you're not validated unless you have 1 million Twitter followers and everybody likes. Forget that. Forget all of that. Get 5 people that think like you think, that are as passionate about this as you are, that are committed to this cause and want to come together and find solutions. Go sit in a coffee shop, in your living room, and wherever, and think about what's missing in your community and what you could start to do. You don't even have to start an organization. You can just start working. That's exactly what young people can do, and that's what I encourage you to do, is start working. Because everything you do counts. If you get 5 people together and you print out the sexual harassment policy at your job or in your school, and then you read that thing from cover to cover and say, you know what, there's some stuff missing here. What about this? What about that? That gives you a jumping off point to go back to your boss and say, listen, we read this thing and we want to talk to you about this. People don't think that what they do counts, but it does. Having the hard conversation with your family is work. That's movement work, right? Because we have to change hearts and minds, and I don't have the keys to unlock your pop-up or your auntie and them or your little cousin, because pop-up and them probably ain't going to change. But your little cousin, who you have influence over, who you hear talking about this differently, who you hear making the kind of decisions that you know are contrary to how we need to move forward, use that influence. All of that is movement work. And then you asked me something else. You said, what's next? Yes. So when I think of this 2 ways when people say what's next, because I want to always say nothing, because we're still in this moment, right? There's so much that we haven't uncovered in this moment. But I understand the question. And one thing that people don't understand is that we are not the hashtag. A hashtag is not a movement. The hashtag is a galvanizing tool, and it was an amazing tool that was used to galvanize people across the world. But now that people are galvanized, Me Too, the movement, is about the work. And so our work is largely around narrative shift, meaning doing things to influence pop culture so that they think about this differently. But it's also programmatic. Like, we have actual programs that are, like, we are piloting GGE, which you keep seeing flashed on the screen. It's piloting, along with a group in Michigan, our teen survivor circle. So the way our programs work is we have virtual healing circles and community healing circles where people can come, not yet, before the end of the year there's a rollout, that you can come and get training from us to start your own healing circle in your community, right? We want to spread this idea that people, it's kind of like an AA model, right? That you can take these steps to start creating safe spaces for people to deal with what healing looks like. We also have survivor leadership training, because I really do believe that survivors should be at the forefront of this work. And so that means that they get really it's organizing training with a sexual violence lens. And then those people also will start working with either the community healing circles, people that are already doing work in that community, to look for the gaps and start doing that work. We're rolling out a tool in the fall that people can use. So a lot of times when I say look for the gaps, people say, okay, and they get excited, and then they're like, oh, I don't know how to do that. And I heard that enough times to, we collaborated with this agency that's helping us build a tool that will help people kind of doing a community assessment to see what's in your community and what's not, and where you can fit in, and then you can like download our toolkit and start getting active. So really the next wave of this is action. It couldn't be quick. It couldn't be overnight. It couldn't happen moments after it went viral because we really had to sit with what we were dealing with as a country and as a world. And now that we really kind of understand the opportunity that we are trying to push people into action and let people understand that everybody has a role to play. So that's what's coming. You'll hear a lot more in the fall, in October, around the anniversary.
All right. Thank you very much. We are at a point in the program where we have time for a couple of questions. There are microphones on the right and left. If anyone wants to ask a question, please make your way down to the front to one of the microphones. And the early bird gets the worm, darling. We are going to start with you because you jumped up to that microphone. Please let us know who you are and briefly ask your question.
Can I say something before you ask the question? Really, if there are people who need to leave, I want to give them so that they don't disrupt, and leave while people are asking questions. But if you're going to stay, just hang on. Ooh, I got a long line. Okay. Go ahead.
Hi, good evening. My name is Natasha Rose, and I am thankful that you are here and that you guys are having this platform. And I have a comment and a question. So I'll start with my question first. I was very happy that you guys spoke about the men because my question was, how do we encapsulate this movement while thinking about our black and brown boys and men, many of whom have also experienced sexual violence, molestation, I do think you guys answered some of that, but it is something that is not discussed. So how can we have men feel comfortable enough to have the discussion?
Well, there are national organizations who work on this already, right? And I think they just are not as prominent as the women's organization. But in our communities, a lot of this is about how we raise our boys and our men and what our ideas of our masculinity are. And so as we start, and I think this generation has done an amazing job of kind of taking up gender norms and things that the ways in which people have traditionally looked at life and roles and masculinity and all of that kind of stuff. So it's a perfect time for us to expand this conversation. That means that when we have forums and when we have opportunities to talk about sexual violence, this should be a part of the agenda that deals with men and boys. What we just saw with the Michael Jackson documentary is an opportunity, I think, regardless of whether you believe it or not. That's not really the debate. But it did open up a conversation about men and boys being molested that we haven't been able to have in this country. And so I think it's shifting some, and you have more men, adult men, standing up saying that, this happened to me too, and having a conversation. But the way we support that is that when these men come forward, or these children really, of course, but when the men come forward, we have to make sure that we maintain that this space is also for them, which means that we have to stop calling this a women's movement. We have to stop using a gendered language when we talk about Me Too, and we reference the work that we do, and we reference the work that needs to be done in our community, because then men feel like they have a space to come forward and say, oh, maybe I do fit in here. Like we have to kind of make, and when I say we, I mean women. We have to kind of make a different kind of space and be vocal about that. Not just internally, we have to be vocal so they understand that this is a place where they can also feel safe.
Yeah, thank you. And really quickly from my comment, you guys were speaking about determining what are the gaps. My philosophy, I like to think, is that many of the gaps are between the generations. Meaning, we need to have elders in our community who have the patience to deal with young folks, because the way, as you mentioned, how young people think are not necessarily how older people.
But this is, that's not what I meant by gap. I understand what you mean about the understanding. What I mean is that if you live in a community that doesn't have a rape crisis center, if you live in a community where people aren't organizing around sexual violence, when you live in a community where there's no those are the gaps I mean, the gaps in resources, gaps in places where you can find.
I agree, and I think that elders, especially in low-income communities where there isn't a lot of resources, those are the resources that younger youth can utilize to get things moving.
I'm gonna push back on that a little bit, sis. I'm gonna tell you why. Elders, so many of our elders are set in stone. They have been living by these philosophies and holding these secrets for decades and decades. And the kind of time that we would have to spend to open that up and unearth it, we don't really have. And so elders can't always be the resource that we go to in our communities. And a lot of times we have to do this around our elders. We have to do it in spite of our elders. It would be wonderful. I hear what you're saying. It would be wonderful if we could open that gap up and have our elders as a resource. But you know what I find more often than not? It's young people who are bringing their elders into this healing. It's young people who are saying, you know, Mom, you said this thing. I have so many people who have told me I've been able to talk to my mom. I just had a boy yesterday who told me he's been able to talk to his mom, and she talked about being molested as a child. So it's young people who are having a different experience and getting a different analysis, and they're able to bring the elders into this. But I don't know that elders can necessarily be that resource because they are it's so indoctrinated by this culture of silence that we're all in. But I do appreciate what you're saying, that would be ideal.
Yes, it would be, and I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. We're gonna go back and forth. So we're gonna be very, very brief.
Which means y'all gotta keep it at questions.
That's right. So let's go here quickly after questions.
Hi, my name is Casey Gordon. I'm a part of SU, student government, as well as a Black student here at York. And my question to you is, I know you mentioned that there was an instance where you felt boxed in and where you didn't feel like you were getting the attention during the interview. And there's also things that you alluded to, like that people are more invested in money than in life. So I wanted to know, because this movement kind of, you didn't really get much attention from the movement. And I wanted to know how you felt about that. I wanted to know if your investment in life, as opposed to investment in money, if that took away from it any way from you, and also how was it fulfilling to you? How do you feel about that?
I just want to be sure I'm clear about the question. You're asking me. Rephrase it one more time.
I'm a little nervous.
That's okay. Go ahead.
Okay, so did you intend for the movement to get more attention than you?
Than me as a person?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Movements don't work are not built around individual people, and they should never be. And so it was never my intention. I've never to be like centered in this movement. What I have realized is a lesson, because I am older, and the lesson I learned in this last year, because I really don't like this kind of visibility that I have for lots of reasons. I mean, it's nice, and then you can, like, people go on Instagram and they're like, "Oh, you met these celebrities," and that's cute. But there's a whole bunch of stuff that comes with that that's not cute, like having to have security and having to move my child, right? I don't need that. I also think that we have such an obsession with celebrity and proximity to celebrity that there's a way that people will celebrate me as an individual and don't know what I stand for and don't stand up for what I stand for. But they're like, "Oh, I saw you on Love and Hip Hop," and I'm like, what was I talking about? So celebrity doesn't serve me unless it is to advance this work that I'm doing. I definitely never expected to be centered in it. But that being said, the lesson that I've learned this year is that if I'm not visible, right? Let's see. If I don't stay in a certain level of visibility, then people won't talk about it. Mm-hmm. Then it disappears. Then you can't push an agenda. So I have been put in this really interesting place. During the Oscars this year, I was out in Hollywood and doing all kind of little events and stuff. And I said to a colleague of mine, "I'm so tired. Like, I don't even want to be here. This is not my, place to be." I mean, some stuff I like to be at. But, in general, I'm just tired. And I said, I wonder if I wasn't here, would I have, fear of missing out? Would I feel bad if they stop inviting me to stuff? And I said, I feel like that. But then when I'm here, I'm like, why am I here? And she said, "Sis, I need you to hang on a little longer because every time you disappear and you lower your visibility, it's harder for us to do this work. You keep it in the mainstream, you keep it in the top of people's minds." And I'm like, okay. But so it's an interesting journey. But yeah,
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We're gonna go over here. Very brief question.
Yes, of course. So my name is Mai Batez, and I am an MSW student here at York.
So I saw you in the audience at the Michael Jackson interview with Oprah Winfrey, and something that she said to me that stood out was, we all gonna get it. And I find that I don't know if you remember that. I do. Okay, and I just find that there's an extreme contrast of believers and not believers. R. Kelly did it. No, he didn't. Michael Jackson did it. No, he didn't. So as an NSW student and teacher social care, like my question to you is, what does that conversation look like when people want to discuss it and people want to argue with you and say, well, why do you believe, what does that conversation look like?
This has been again, this is not my ministry, right? So this part of the work is so foreign to me. I have been amazed at the way in which it's so polarizing for people and how they can. And so this kind of goes to the other sister's question about celebrity. We are so obsessed with celebrity that people will die on that hill, right? And people are like, there's evidence, and there's this, and there's that, and I'm like, okay, I'm not here for that. I'm just not here for that. But it gave me further validation that the work we have to do is about making sure that people understand what survivorship looks like. That there's no one way to be a survivor, right? The argument against R. Kelly survivors and Michael Jackson survivors is the same, just from different communities, right? So when people look at the young black girls, they see these girls who put themselves out there, who, went to him voluntarily, blah, 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 and they think, and they hold them complicit for their own abuse. And they look at the Michael Jackson boys and they say, well, you kept going back and you were part of his life. The only way that you can say something like that is if you do not understand what it means to survive sexual abuse, right? Everybody survives differently. And again, it goes back to what happens in our everyday lives, because how many people are molested by the pastor and stay in the church, right? Who are molested by the coach and stay on the team and leave the team and keep coming back because people don't get the psychology of survival and how the moment that you break that relationship, then you have to acknowledge this other thing. So there's so much that the world needs to know and understand, and I just try to keep the conversation about that. I don't want to argue with you about whether you believe it or not, and all of the YouTube videos that show the evidence and he didn't draw the penis and then all of that nonsense. It's just noise. What's much more important is that we understand that these two grown men said that these things happened to them, and that all the evidence we need is that the grown man they're accusing said out of his mouth that he sleeps in the bed with children. So we need to talk about the survivors and not about the perpetrators.
Okay. Thank you. We're going to go to you on this side.
Hi. First, I just want to say thank you for talking and speaking your truth. In terms of trauma, they always say to get over it, to get through it. So I have personal diaries. I have a few confidential. But do you think it's necessary to seek professional help or a psychiatrist, therapist, whatever, to go through trauma? Is that necessary?
If you've been through trauma.
Yeah.
So I always recommend at some point seeking professional help if you can. Like the alternatives that we create, the resources we create, are for people who just don't have access to things like that. So you may come to a community healing circle and go to therapy, but there's going to be we used to have a community healing circle in my church in Philadelphia. I didn't even have it. I didn't have insurance at one point, so I could not go to therapy. This was all I had. But if you have the options and the resources, and I'm going to tell you why briefly. There are lots of people who have come to terms with it, have said, I got it out, this is what happened to me, and I'm good. But what you don't prepare for is for when that wound gets opened up again. And really what the healing journey looks like is a series of opening and closing that wound until you get it closed to a point where it's harder and harder to reopen. And so what therapy did for me, and what I know it's done for other people, is that it gave me tools that I can use so that, yes, I've come to terms with it, but what I don't know is, how has this affected my life? Where is this going to pop up in other places in my life that I don't even relate to what's the things that happen to me, right? How I perform at work, how I have into relationships with other women. That you think, it's only about romantic relationships, but the way I trust, there's lots of things that we just don't know about how being a survivor affects us. So if you have the resources, I would certainly the help, and it just helps to have it. Every now and again, I don't go to my therapist all the time because I can't, but I definitely got them on speed dial. Things start getting a little shaky. I'm like, listen, I need to talk, and I don't need to talk to my girlfriend. I need to talk to somebody else. It's a different relationship. So I recommend it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We're going to go over here.
Hi, my name is Janelle Sinclair. I work in the police department here at York. And my question is in reference to survivors who may not realize they're survivors or victims who may not realize they're victims. Like how you spoke on the obsession with celebrities.
Yeah.
You may have females who, because this person is popular or has money, and he's 20 years older than you, though, or he's using you, or males in particularly, who think it's awesome thing that
because a woman
wants to date them, or they're,
I get you. I got
harassed. How do you deal with them or talk to them and get them not to get this, just to see things differently?
I'm gonna tell you what we did, and this is really the heart of how Me Too started. When I was talking about the early stages, we were dealing with young people who did not have language. They didn't know how to describe the stuff that was happening to them. And differently from Heaven, he came to me and said, this happened to me. What I was faced with when we went into the school system were, perfect examples. I had a 7th grade student once who I just happened to run into after school because she was waiting for her ride home. And I was like, why are you out here? And she said, I'm waiting for my boyfriend. I found it a little strange because she was in the 7th grade, but it could be some little scrawny 7th grader rolling up on his bicycle, coming to get her. But it was a grown man who pulled up in a car. Now, I took care of the grown man, right? Allegedly. But
there's no proof of that.
We won't talk about that. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was the next day she was hot fire burning mad with me for breaking up her relationship. And so what that taught me is that I had to figure out how do I talk to this child and let her understand that that's not a relationship, that's a crime. The way that we went about it is very difficult to say, don't do this, don't do that. This thing happened, let me tell you. We gave a lot of information. You have to expose them. So we would have the whole class has to learn these definitions. The whole class has to understand what statutory rape is, what not just good and bad touch, but what grooming is, right? We talked about these things in detail to give them the space to discover it themselves. It was especially because we were working with young people, but I haven't seen it be really successful when people try to force people into being survivors and say, I'm telling you this is what's happening. They're going to just be more resistant. But if you provide them with information and you keep exposing them to information about what that looks like, people will find themselves in that. Because the reality is, even if you're a 15-year-old dating a 36-year-old man, there's something painful about that. There's something in there, in that relationship, in that experience that your brain is not ready for and you don't know how to process, that you need space to think about and to contextualize. And you're not going to come to it until you understand that this is a problem. So that was the route that we took, by giving lots of information, and then people would be like, hey, Miss T, that thing we talked about today, I think that's happening to me. You're welcome.
We're going to keep the questions super brief.
I'm going to try to keep my answer super brief.
About 5 minutes left, but I want to give everybody who's been standing online a chance. So we're still here.
Good afternoon. I want to say thank you for coming to talk to us. Thank you. And you very much inspire me, especially because my name is Celeste Kennedy. Sorry. I'm one of the founders of the Black Student Union. Yeah. So I believe that I'm an activist for issues within the Black community. And my question to you is, I'm laying down the groundwork. That's why I started the Black Student Union. But what advice do you have for the legacy behind it? Because I want it to grow and I want it to stay on York campus forever. I want it to be something that generally gives back to the Black community. Yeah.
I mean, legacy building is not hard. You have to. What year are you in?
I'm a senior. I graduated in December. I started it in last month.
Okay, so you should have some. Yes, that deserves a round of applause. I started the African American Student Alliance at my school. I finished school in 1996. They still have the African American Student Alliance at Auburn University. And the reason why is because before I left that school, I had freshmen who were with me. We had a manual. We had a process set up. So you have to institutionalize the work. The way you keep that going is you institutionalize the work. People should, and this is really just literal advice, people should not have to look for paperwork. People should not have to look for how we hold meetings and all of that stuff. You should have that somewhere collectively, and there should be somebody right now, a freshman or a sophomore, who you are training to take their place, right? And it should be in the rules that a senior should not always be in leadership by themselves. So you keep passing the leadership like that, right? You make sure that somebody stays in leadership, and it'll stay around forever because people need it. But just work really hard on institutionalizing it now, so that you have something to pass on. Thank you. You're welcome.
Here. Good evening. My name is Abella Bryan, and I'm a social worker. And you kind of answered the question when with the person before me, because the point I was going to bring apart is in regarding having the conversation with young people in the school system. I've worked in an agency where we've had the conversation where we did workshops on sexual harassment, gating violence. So I wanted to know how extensive is Me Too connected with the school system in regarding having those conversations.
We're not connected with the school system right now because we are a new iteration of this work. But I have always had programs in schools. Girls for Gender Equity, where I was senior director right before this started, has programs in schools. What I have run into with programming in school, though, is that the administration usually is resistant to talking about sexual violence or even rape culture or anything like that. Now, I'm going to say this out loud, but I'm going to also add allegedly to this, too, because I'm not going to say this happened or didn't happen. But, what would it look like if you created a program and went into school and you didn't use those words into, like healthy relationships? This is a program about healthy relationships. I just believe in a by hook or by crook method. We have to get this message to young people, by hook or by crook. I also, sometimes we have to operate outside the school system. So I always had after-school programs. You come through my after-school program, you're going to learn all about these things. We do cultural stuff and all the rest of that too. But the last thing I would say about that is the school systems, if you can get in them, are really effective because that's a place where young people are trained to learn and take in knowledge. But any other ways in which you can deliver that message to young people, we have to use. And we use pop culture. We use pop culture a lot. When I first started doing these workshops, it was very few Black women talked openly about their experience with sexual violence. Gabrielle Union was talking about, her experience. I was like going through magazines trying to find it, so I used Mary J. Blige and Queen Latifah and Missy Elliott and Little Kim and whoever. This is obviously a different time, but I think we have to also meet children where they are and what they relate to. And so you probably wouldn't be surprised, but the difference between me saying this is a definition of blah 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 and saying this is a definition of that, and then we have these sheets of paper, right? And on one side it would tell a story that related to the definition, and when they turned it over, it was a picture of one of those people, and they'd be like, "Oh my God, that happened to Mary J. Blige. Oh my God!" Right? And so that stays with them. Just be creative and think outside the box, but get the information out there. Thank you. You're welcome. Yes. Okay, last one on this show.
Hello, my name is Alexander. I just want to say thank you for coming, and also you're a big inspiration to me.
Thank you.
I'm a part of the LGBT community, and I also have been a victim of gay bashing, and I also have a cousin. She is a transgendered woman, and she was in the army, and they wrongfully discharged her from the army due to the fact she was transgendered. And I was wondering, are you currently, or are you going to be working with the LGBT community? Like,
we already do.
Okay.
Yeah. Half of our staff is LGBT. Is queer. Yeah, that's a big issue for me. It's a big part of this work for me. It's a community. So there's marginalization within our community around LGBTQ issues. So you will often hear me talk about queer and trans people. My daughter's queer, which is, I'm not ashamed to say, which is one of the reasons why I'm more passionate about that as an issue, and gender nonconforming. So it is something that Me Too is really clear about. We don't mince words about that our work supports all genders, and all the whole spectrum of sexuality for sure.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Here we go.
Good afternoon. I just want to say thank you for your time today. I'm a CUNY graduate student, and I'm in the process of writing my thesis on the workplace impact of the Me Too movement. I'm also an HR practitioner at a CUNY school, another CUNY school. And I'm asking this question of both professional and also students. Do you think the Me Too movement is progressively improving or helping to create a safe space for employees so that they would not experience sexual harassment? And how can employers do better?
I think the fastest growing place where we're seeing policy shifts and culture shifts is in employment recruitment, without question. So much so that I tend to, because it's also not my lane, right? The one part of this explosion of Me Too that is work that I had nothing to do with before was sexual harassment in the workplace. I've dealt with sexual harassment amongst young people and in schools, and so, but I mean, it's also common sense to a large degree. So I speak at a lot of corporate places and to a lot of employers, and on the one hand, without compassion, without, connection to movement and wanting to be just altruistic, folks don't want to be on the wrong side of it. They just don't want to be on the wrong side of Me Too in this moment. And so there's been some drastic shifts in employment. If it wasn't announced, it's about to be announced, this new $20 million fund that was created specifically to move resources into organizations that work to end sexual harassment in the workplace. So there's a lot more traction around that than there is around the rest of the spectrum of sexual violence. I think we'll see new, and it's also easier to regulate. So you can it's very hard to create federal regulations or even statewide regulations around sexual violence, but it's much easier to do it in regards to sexual harassment in a workplace and holding employees accountable. So absolutely, I think we'll see big strides around that over the next 5 years.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
All right, brothers, all on you.
Kevin, you have our last question.
No pressure.
No pressure. No pressure, Kevin. Make it good.
Hello, how you doing? With the pleasure to meet you on Street. My name is Kevin. I'm a social student, and I'm also representing student government. So there's research that has been done that states that
Come closer to the mic, baby.
you hear me? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
There's research that has been done that states that punishment doesn't change behavior. You spoke about harm reduction and accountability. So my question to you is that how can we implement accountability at the same time adding that learning piece for people who committed those acts?
I need to hear it clearly. How can we
implement accountability at the same time adding that learning piece for people who committed those acts?
There's a word I'm missing there. At the same time as
For people who commit those acts.
So accountability
and learning.
And learning. But learning should be embedded in accountability, right? One of the most frustrating things about watching people sort of come back in the last year, the people who've been accused in the mainstream, is that they just kind of disappear for 6 months and they kind of creep back on the scene. And then people are like, oh, okay, enough time has passed. And there's no mechanism that allows them to say, like Louis C.K. is a perfect example, right? I think that Louis C.K. in the long list of people who've done things did not have the most egregious case, if you will. That's a big, bold statement for me to say because I wasn't the survivor. But if I was just looking at the facts of the cases, and he came out quickly and said, I did this. These things that they accused me of, I did it. So it would have been wonderful to see him go away like he did and then come back and say, this is what I did in the last year. In the last year, I contacted the people who I harmed to find out what they need to be made whole again. And then I went through this bit of training. And then I talked to these people. Show your work, right? It's not, accountability is not just saying, all right, I'm sorry, you got me. And so there's a whole transformative justice model around building accountability in our communities that is defined by the people who were harmed, that makes the person first whole that was harmed, and then the community whole again. Because when sexual violence happens in our communities, it doesn't just happen to an individual, it tears apart as a community. So learning and it should be embedded in anything that we do that even approaches accountability. That means it has to be, you don't just get out of this, and it's lifelong learning. So this is not, you did something for 2 months, you did something for a couple of months, and this is something that has to be in our schools and in our, like it's just it's a paradigm shift. But I think, again, if we started modeling that on college campuses, right, these are communities. And for young adults, this is the first community that you're really a part of. Like, you come up in a community, but you don't make decisions in that community. You don't contribute in the same way. I really want to see a push where college campuses adopt a model of what accountability can look like that may be outside of Title IX or maybe outside of these regulations that allow us to figure out how we reduce harm while we hold people accountable.
Because sometimes accountability looks different from
and it's absolutely that's the reason why you have to start with the person that was harmed. Because what I need to feel whole again may not be what she needs. So people keep talking about we're seeing accountability, and that's I know I'm going back to Harvey Weinstein, but when Harvey Weinstein was arrested, I talked to several of the women who accused him, and say I talked to 5 of them, at least 4 of them were like, this doesn't mean anything to me. They didn't feel like that was a sense of accountability. You know, he was being held accountable. So it looks different for different people. That's why the harm has to define it, or be central to define it.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to thank all of you for your questions that were very, very insightful.
They were.
They were very insightful. I tell you, our students, they care very deeply.
I'm going to tell you what, your administration loves you. They've been bigging up your students since I got on this campus.
Yes, folks here love you. You're awesome. We've come to the end of our program. I want to thank you so much.
Thank you,
Tarana, for
thank you.
being
Thank
here.
y'all. Thank you for having me.
We have a small token of our appreciation.
Oh, I like tokens.
To you. Ooh, my leg. Please, come on up. While we're doing that, I want to also take this opportunity to thank Dr. Round Daniels. Without him, this would not have been possible. And we at York continue to benefit from knowing him. I want to thank Cameron Bruno. Thank you so much. Yes.
I always get them when I'm on the road.
Cameron Bruno, our NYC Poet Laureate, we want to thank her. I need to thank those of you from the Student Government Association. Without you all, this event would not be possible. The York College Association, the Office of Student Development, the Office of the President, my staff, who worked very, very hard on this event. I need to thank my husband because he kept listening to me talk about you for the last year and how much I wanted to get you, and my mom for watching the babies while I was here doing the work. Thank everyone. There's a brief reception upstairs. Please feel free to go and partake. And thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you.